All right, so we're diving deep into the fall of Bashar al-Assad, like the Syrian president who just got basically kicked out of his own country.
Oh, yeah.
We've got this interesting stuff from this YouTube channel, Traveling with Elaine,
Yeah.
to help us like figure out how this guy went from like this powerful leader to basically on someone else's couch in Russia.
You're in for a wild ride for sure. This isn't just some history lesson, you know? It's really about understanding how power can shift and what happens when a country's leadership just collapses.
So like, where do we even begin with a story like this? It's crazy. I guess we go back to the start, right?
Yeah, exactly. Assad took over from his dad, right? Who was also a pretty tough ruler, but for a little bit, people actually thought maybe things would be different with Bashar.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there was all this talk about reforms, you know, but it turned out to be all talk and no action. He basically just tightened the screws even more than his dad, cracking down on anyone who, like, disagreed with him.
Sounds like this guy was not exactly Mr. Popularity.
You could say that again, you know. Years of this iron-fisted rule, you know, created a lot of anger and resentment among the Syrian people.
Yeah, you can imagine.
And then came 2011 and the Arab Spring, you know, those uprisings that were happening all over the Middle East.
Right, people were like fed up with dictators and demanding change.
Yeah.
So how did that play out in Syria?
Well, remember all that built-up frustration we talked about?
Yeah.
Well, when Syrians saw people in other countries rising up, they were inspired to do the same. They started with peaceful protests, hoping for some, you know, basic freedoms, reforms, that kind of stuff.
But knowing what we know about Assad, I'm guessing he wasn't exactly thrilled about this whole protest thing.
You got it. The regime responded with brutal fares.
Oh, wow.
I mean, tanks, soldiers, the whole 9 yards.
Jeez.
That, my friend, was the spark that ignited the Syrian civil war. What started as calls for change turned into a full-blown fight for survival.
So things escalated quickly.
Yeah.
So this war obviously dragged on, and from what I've seen in these Traveling with Elaine videos, it absolutely wrecked Syria. I mean, the economy was in shambles, right?
Totally. Imagine years of fighting, bombing, and chaos that's going to like cripple any country's economy.
For sure.
People were struggling to get basic necessities like food and water. It was a humanitarian disaster on a massive scale.
Yeah.
And that economic hardship, that desperation, it started to chip away at Assad's power from the inside.
It's like a house of cards, right?
Yeah.
You take out one supporting piece and the whole thing starts to crumble.
Exactly. And it wasn't just the economy. The war also caused some major cracks within Assad's own military.
What do you mean?
Well, some of his top guys who had been loyal for years, they started to turn against him.
Really?
Yeah, they saw the devastation, the brutality, and they just couldn't stomach it anymore.
So they defected.
Yep. They took their troops and their resources with them, which obviously further weakened Assad's grip on power.
Wow. Okay. So we've got like a wrecked economy, a fracturing military, and a population that's beyond fed up. What else piled on to finally topple Assad?
Well, don't forget about the international pressure. Remember, this wasn't just some internal squabble. The whole world was watching.
Right. And most countries were not exactly Assad fans at this point.
Not even close. There was global condemnation of his regime's actions. Countries started imposing sanctions, which basically meant cutting off trade and making it harder for Assad to get the money and resources he needed. Think of it like the world putting him in a timeout.
Right. So it's like everything that could go wrong for Assad did go wrong.
Pretty much.
But we also have to talk about the Syrian people themselves, right? I mean, they were the ones actually living through this nightmare.
Absolutely. It's easy to focus on the, you know, political and military stuff, but the real story here is the resilience of the Syrian people. They endured years of unimaginable hardship, but they never gave up their fight for freedom and dignity.
That's powerful. So even though Assad was trying to crush any opposition, the people never backed down.
Nope. They kept resisting even when it seemed hopeless. They organized protests, documented the regime's crimes, and provided aid to those in need. They were a constant thorn in Assad's side, and their courage played a massive role in his eventual downfall.
That brings us to, like, the final piece of the puzzle, the international players. We know Assad had some powerful allies, right?
Yeah, Russia and Iran had his back for a long time. They provided military aid, economic support, and helped him spin the narrative in his favor.
Spin the narrative. What do you mean by that?
It's about controlling the story, making sure the world sees things from Assad's perspective.
Yeah.
They use their media outlets, their diplomats, to downplay the atrocities and paint Assad as a victim of Western aggression.
So even though Assad was doing some pretty terrible things, Russia and Iran were basically trying to make it look like he was the good guy.
Exactly. They had their own reasons for supporting him.
Right.
For Russia, it was about maintaining their influence in the region, you know, having a foothold in the Middle East. And for Iran, it was about furthering their own geopolitical goals and weakening their rivals.
So Assad had these big-time backers, but even they couldn't prop him up forever, right?
Right. As the war dragged on and as Assad's regime continued to crumble, even Russia and Iran started to have second thoughts. Think about it. Propping up a failing regime is expensive.
Yeah, especially when that regime is being hit with international sanctions and losing ground every day.
Exactly. And Russia had other fish to fry. They were getting involved in other conflicts, dealing with their own economic problems. They couldn't afford to keep pouring resources into a lost cause.
So even Assad's friends started to back away. What about the countries that were against him? Did they play a role in his downfall?
Oh, absolutely. Western countries, particularly the U.S., were increasingly supporting opposition groups in Syria. They provided weapons training and intelligence. It was a complex game of chess with everyone trying to move their pieces into the best position.
So basically, you've got this chaotic mess of internal problems, international pressure, and shifting alliances.
Yeah.
It's no wonder Assad's grip on power finally slipped.
That's a good way to put it. It was a perfect storm of factors that ultimately led to his downfall.
Okay, so we've laid out how Assad went from top dog to being on the run. But now he's hiding out in Russia, right? What's the deal with that?
That's where things get really interesting, and that's what we'll dive into next. So Assad's in Russia, right? But it's not exactly a vacation, you know?
Yeah.
Imagine trading in your dictator digs for a life under constant watch.
Oh yeah, I bet.
He's basically a guest of the Kremlin, but a guest who can't leave the house.
So from calling all the shots to being under someone else's thumb, what does this even mean for Syria now that he's out of the picture?
Well, you'd think with a dictator gone, things would just settle down, right?
I think so, yeah.
Not so fast. Syria's kind of like a house with the roof ripped off.
Oh, wow.
And everyone inside scrambling for like the best room.
Okay, that's a pretty vivid picture. You're saying even without Assad, there's still a ton of chaos.
You bet. Remember those opposition groups we mentioned?
Yeah.
They weren't exactly one big happy family. They had different goals, different beliefs, and now they're all fighting for power.
Right.
It's a recipe for more conflict and instability.
So it's like swapping out one problem for like a bunch of smaller problems. What are these groups even fighting for?
Well, some want a democracy, some want a religious state, and some just want power for themselves.
Oh, wow.
It's a tangled mess of ideologies and ambitions.
I bet.
And to make matters worse, other countries are getting involved, you know,
Oh, no.
trying to back their favorite groups and influence the outcome.
So basically more chaos.
Pretty much.
Okay, so we've got internal fighting and outside interference. What does that mean for like the average person in Syria who just wants to live a normal life?
For them, it means continued hardship and uncertainty. They've already endured so much war displacement, economic collapse.
Yeah, it's great.
And now they're facing the prospect of even more conflict and instability.
It's heartbreaking to think about. They deserve a chance to rebuild their lives and their country.
I agree. It's a stark reminder that even when a dictator falls, the road to peace and stability is long and difficult. And remember, the war in Syria has had ripple effects far beyond its borders.
I mean, for sure.
Think about the refugee crisis, the rise of extremist groups, the impact on global politics.
It's like throwing a rock in a pond, right?
Yeah.
The ripples just keep spreading outwards.
Exactly.
So let's go back to Assad chilling in Russia. Is he just living out his days in luxury, or is there more to it?
Well, luxury might be a stretch. Remember, he's under constant surveillance, likely living in a gilded cage. He might have some comforts, but he's definitely not free. And here's the thing. Russia has their own agenda.
Okay, so what are they getting out of keeping Assad around?
Control.
Control.
They want to control the narrative of what happened in Syria, downplay their own role in propping up a brutal regime, and maintain their influence in the region. Having Assad under their thumb gives them leverage.
Right.
They can use him as a bargaining chip in future negotiations or as a puppet to push their own interests in Syria.
So it's like a weird hostage situation where the hostage is a former dictator. It's also twisted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's the question of accountability.
Right.
Assad's accused of some truly horrific crimes against his own people. Can he be held responsible if he's under Russia's protection?
I mean, should he just get to walk away from all that?
That's a tough question. Ideally, there would be a process of truth and reconciliation, a way for the Syrian people to confront what happened and seek justice for the victims. But with Assad in Russia, that becomes much harder.
So does this mean he's basically off the hook?
It's not that simple. The International Criminal Court could still issue an arrest warrant, but whether Russia would comply is another story. And even if they did, it's not clear what a trial would look like or what kind of punishment would be appropriate.
It feels like there are no good answers here. Just a lot of mess and unanswered questions.
Yeah, you're getting it.
Yeah.
The situation is incredibly complex. There are no easy solutions, and the consequences of the Syrian conflict will continue to be felt for years to come.
This whole deep dive has been pretty heavy, but super important. I think the most disturbing thing for me is like the sense that the Syrian people are caught in the middle of all this.
Right.
Their lives, their future, it's all being decided by forces beyond their control.
I understand your concern. It's crucial to remember that this isn't just about politics or geopolitics. It's about human lives. Millions of Syrians have been displaced. Countless lives have been lost, and the country is in ruins. The international community has a responsibility to help them rebuild to ensure they have a chance at a better future.
That's where we need to focus now, right?
Exactly.
On what happens next, on how we can support the Syrian people as they navigate this incredibly difficult path.
Absolutely. We need to stay informed, hold our leaders accountable, and support organizations working to provide humanitarian aid and promote peace and justice in Syria.
It feels overwhelming, but I guess even small actions can make a difference.
That's the right attitude. Every little bit helps.
Well, this conversation has definitely given me a lot to think about. And as always, a huge thank you to Traveling with Elaine for providing the information that sparked this deep dive. Their videos are a great resource for anyone who wants to understand the complexities of the world we live in.
They do an excellent job of breaking down complex issues in a way that's both informative and engaging.
We'll be back after a quick break to explore what Assad's exile means for him, for Syria, and for the world. Okay, so we're back, and we've been digging deep into this whole fall of Bashar al-Assad, right?
Yeah.
And now he's living it up in Russia. But I gotta say, it's hard to imagine how this guy went from ruling a country to basically being stuck in some gilded cage. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. It's wild to think about, right? What's going on in his head right now?
Right.
I mean, he went from calling all the shots to having every move monitored.
I know, it's crazy.
Does he regret all those terrible things he did? Or is he just bitter about losing his power?
It's like some real-life Shakespearean tragedy, but with way more bloodshed.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But what I find so crazy is the irony of it all.
Mm-hmm.
Assad spent years painting himself as this strong, independent leader.
Right.
But now he's completely dependent on Russia for protection.
Yeah. Talk about a role reversal, right?
Yeah.
He's like a bird with clipped wings, Russia's calling the shots now, and they're not exactly known for being charitable.
So what's next for Syria? Is there any hope for peace and stability with Assad out of the picture?
That's the million-dollar question. Unfortunately, it's not as simple as just removing a dictator and expecting things to magically get better. Syria's been torn apart by years of war and these deep internal divisions.
So what needs to happen for them to even begin to heal?
Well, for starters, those different factions that we talked about.
Yeah.
They need to find a way to work together. They need to put aside their differences and focus on rebuilding their country.
Right.
It's a long shot, but it's not impossible. Look at other countries that have gone through similar conflicts. It takes time, compromise, and a lot of hard work.
It's like putting Humpty Dumpty back together again.
Exactly.
But even if they manage to do that, there's still the issue of outside interference.
You hit the nail on the head. Other countries, especially powerful ones like Russia and the US, they need to back off and let the Syrian people decide their own fate. No more using them as pawns in these geopolitical games.
That's easier said than done, though, right?
Oh, for sure.
Everyone wants a piece of the pie.
It's true. But the international community also has a responsibility to help Syria rebuild both physically and economically, providing humanitarian aid, investing in infrastructure, supporting refugees. These are all crucial steps.
So it's a long road ahead with no easy answers. But it sounds like there's at least a glimmer of hope for Syria, even without Assad at the helm.
Absolutely. And don't forget the Syrian people themselves, their resilience, their determination to rebuild their lives, that's their greatest asset.
That's a good point. This has been a heavy, but super fascinating deep dive.
It has.
We've covered a lot of ground. From Assad's rise and fall to this complex web of factors that led to this point. Yeah. What's the biggest takeaway for you?
For me, it's the reminder that even the most powerful figures can be brought down and that the fight for freedom and justice is never truly over. It's a story that's still unfolding, and we need to keep paying attention, keep asking questions, and keep pushing for a better future for Syria and its people.
Well said. And a huge thank you to Traveling with Elaine for providing the insightful material that fueled this deep dive. They've got a knack for making complex topics engaging and accessible. So be sure to check out their channel.
Yeah, they're a fantastic resource for anyone who wants to understand the forces shaping our world.
That's all the time we have for today. But this conversation doesn't end here. We encourage you to continue exploring this topic, stay informed, and consider how you can contribute to a more just and peaceful world. Until next time, thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.